So our howtosolarnow.org URL that's down there, here's where our resources are, where you can get to that solar mapping tool and that Alex just described, as well as our new solar zoning guide. And so one of the first things that we put together was our siting guide. It's now a couple of years old. But what it really did was set the framework and the principles out for our approach to siting renewable energy. And this goes back to a lot of the issues that Kate mentioned in her quick opening remarks. You know, she used the term onslaught, and you know, in some places where they are experiencing that they are the so-called sweet spot, as she mentioned, right, where land prices and energy prices and interconnection potential and flat land, which is really important to solar, all sort of exist in one place. And then, of course, that is where the developers are going to congregate and look to get projects built. And so in the context of that, we set out to put forth a few principles for siting of renewable energies. And one of those that I mentioned already is, you know, sort of the first principle that makes sense is, okay, let's put it on places that have already been previously disturbed, you know, or co-locate it with other things like co-locate agricultural production and energy production at the same time, or something like a parking lot canopy, right, where you can park cars and generate energy at the same time. And what that'll do is help reduce pressure on open spaces and natural resources, right, if we can prioritize development in those areas. But at the same time, you know, there are places out there where perhaps we can site larger ground mount projects in a way that does avoid wetlands, which does get its emissions reduction benefits, while also making sure that we're not impacting, you know, designated public visual resources, important core forests and other things. And really what we're trying to do is promote successful and streamlined renewable energy development, help achieve those renewable energy goals, but do it in a way that makes sense. So that's where the planning comes in. And this resource came out a couple of years ago. And so now we're building on that with our solar mapping tool. And this photograph, if you can recognize where this is up in the town of Greenport. That is a transmission line that crosses the Hudson River over to Athens up near the city of Hudson. And this is a community solar project built by a company called East Light Partners. And they originally proposed it to be a little bit bigger and a little bit different configuration. And it was very close to a historic resource called the Plum Bronson House up on Route 9, up in the city of, or town of Greenport. And, you know, we got involved, the developer was amenable and took our input seriously. You know, we looked to the principles in our siting guide, and what the project developer did was, you know, they were able to reconfigure the project, move some solar panels in such a way so that any impacts on that adjacent historic resource were mitigated or avoided. The other resource in the area that we were concerned about is Alana, and it turned out that this is not visible or in the Alana viewshed. So that's how we got involved with a project based on our principles. And then the next thing we wanted to do was, you know, make that kind of information available to people in this GIS-based map. So really quickly, again, I know that Alex mentioned this, but our approach to solar planning that we took in the tool started at the municipality, right? Alex discussed the National Land Cover Database and the information in that GIS layer that lets you sort of zoom out and look at the region or the municipality that you're interested in and just look at existing patterns of land use, right? And so that can tell you, all right, where are the red built areas? That might be a place where we want to try and facilitate co-location and reuse of those areas. Well, where are the agricultural lands, right? Now, maybe we need to look more closely at those Are they fallow? Are they still productive? What's their status? Are they being leased? Right? And what makes sense in terms of development there. So that's the first step. And then secondly, find the low-hanging fruit. Where are the opportunities, the parking lots, the rooftops? And so that second grouping of data layers we have allow you to do that. And then thirdly, we have those natural resources layers, the wetlands, the floodplains, the forested areas, the streams, the agricultural soils. And so you can take a look at those and their existence and build that into your thinking about where projects can or shouldn't go. And then fourthly, evaluate solar feasibility. And the two kinds of information that we put into that bucket were the slope and aspect of the lands, right? The topography, and then the interconnection potential. So the one thing I will say about this approach to planning from what I would call a more municipal perspective is that it's backwards from the way developers approach planning for solar, right? Their first question is going to be, where can I connect it into the grid? And then, where is going to be a flat piece of land where I can put it? And then they're going to worry about, okay, are there wetlands or agricultural soils that are going to give me a problem, right? And then they're going to worry about whether or not, the zoning district is prohibitive or there's some sort of setbacks or something like that that will cause them a problem. So, what it sets up is sort of a different approach to thinking about where this should go. But as we mentioned from the get-go, and as Kate mentioned, look, if what we're hoping to do here is get information in the hands of municipalities and really help people to find ways to integrate this into the landscape in a way that makes sense, we sort of need to take a hold of this planning process. And our suggestion is to approach it from this direction as opposed to the other way around. So I know I am doing a lot of talking here. I don't know if folks are able to unmute themselves. I don't know why, but I can't see a chat if anybody is typing anything into the chat. But if you are able to unmute yourselves, go ahead and feel free to ask questions along the way. I see Simon's hand is up. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah,
yes?
I think so. Can you hear me?
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, in the How to Solar Now things that you've made available, do you include a sort of best practices solar code that a Conservation Advisory Council or a planning board could use if the town doesn't already have a solar code?
So we thought about this a lot, and I'm sure that probably in your travels you have come across the model solar law that NYSERDA has out. And so the next thing I'll talk about here is our new solar zoning handbook that we put out. And we put this handbook together in a way that is sort of agnostic to the model solar law. But it does differ from it. At least the last time I looked at NYSERDA's model solar law was that it put solar projects into tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And it seemed to me that those tiers were, tier 1 was very small, tier 2 was only a little bit bigger, and then tier 3 could be this huge range of sized projects. Because as you know, solar can come from anything, to just a few kilowatts on somebody's roof, or maybe even a panel in someone's side yard, to a community solar project of, 5 or 6 megawatts, to now we are seeing projects being proposed in New York State of 300 megawatts over thousands of acres. And while those are under the purview of the state in terms of permitting, the law still does require, unless it's unduly burdensome, for projects to comply with local law. So what I will do in response to that question is go through very quickly what is really basically our table of contents from the solar zoning guide. And so in terms of those best practices, what I am hoping is that people can use that model solar law and the NYSERDA resources and then take the recommendations in our code, which are really meant to provide flexibility and promote well-cited projects and inform the process, and then come up with a code of your own. So really quickly, and it's 6:47, I think we're going to get dumped out of here at 6:55. The recommendations of our solar zoning guide are, first of all, be pro-solar, right? Either put it in your comprehensive plan or adopt a resolution that says we want to see well-cited solar here. Secondly, take a look at your existing codes and see what might be a barrier, right? Is there something that would be prohibitive? Does your code say any use that is not specifically permitted is prohibited, and then not say anything about solar at all, right? And so if solar isn't even mentioned and any unmentioned use is prohibited, then solar is prohibited, right? So make sure you're eliminating the barriers. And so to get to Simon's question, our next recommendation is to make sure that you are clearly defining what solar energy systems are and what kinds of solar energy systems you plan to regulate in your town. And we suggest making it a combination of type and use, right? There's 3 types of solar. There's building integrated solar, there's rooftop solar, and then there's ground mount solar. But then there's a couple of different kinds of uses of solar. It might be used only on site. It might be produced and then used all off site. Or maybe it could be a combination, right? There's a building in Kingston that has solar on the roof and it provides energy to the building, but it's also large enough that it's actually, sending energy off site. And then there are also people subscribed to it as sort of a community solar use. So they're getting credits for owning a piece of it. So make sure that you are defining the solar clearly. Fourth, we provide some information in there, and Alex alluded to this, but know what the market is, right? New York State has many incentives for building solar energy, and then the utilities have different requirements for how they interconnect. And then there's, different energy pricing. So those things have an influence, of course, on what the developers are proposing, because their interest is in making money. Fifth is to plan smart, and I'll talk about that more coming up. Six, you want to regulate it right. So the different size solar projects have different land use impacts. And so you want to set up a permitting system that makes sense, right? If it's just a rooftop project, well, use the unified solar permit. But if it's a ground mount project, you might want to put that project through a very lengthy site plan and special use permit process. So regulate it right. Use the right kind of permitting process that is commensurate with potential impacts. And then we address a couple of very tough issues with regard to solar, their visual impacts, and then their impacts on agricultural uses. So there's some best practices and recommendations in that book for dealing with those really tough issues. And, there you really need to reach out to the community, get input, have knowledge of what the visual resources and the agricultural resources are in your community, and bring that in. And then we also recommend, allow solar as broadly as you can. Don't just limit it to commercial and industrial zones, which actually makes no sense. Why would you want it to compete with your ratables, right? Your places that are going to bring in tax dollars. And then also provide flexibility. Make sure that when you're setting your bulk and area standards that you do it in such a way that the projects don't have to keep seeking variances to get built. And then plan for the future. That addresses that decommissioning issue. And then also, you can adopt portions of your code to promote solar use going forward. So this is me doing a lot of talking still. But when it comes to those planning recommendations and tying this into the tool and those 4 steps of planning, right? When you're going to write a solar law, what's the basis of your law, but your zoning districts, right? And so figuring out what you've already got built, where it makes really good sense to co-locate solar, where other places are that we want to promote and allow its use, all of that can be studied and informed by use of the tool. And then you build that into your zoning law. And I would just want to say one more thing, and I know Alex mentioned this, the hosting capacity issue, right? It might be the case that you look at your town or your municipality and you say, okay, it makes sense for it to go here. Or you might even be a quite rural community where there is not much capacity in the lines, right? So even though you write a solar law and it permits solar in certain zoning districts or wants to promote solar, it's, you know, it might not necessarily be a quote unquote build it and they will come kind of thing. If we allow it, they will show up, because the developer needs to be able to interconnect and there has to be capacity. But our recommendation is zone for it anyway. And then, you know, if they really want to build it, first of all, the developer can pay to upgrade the system. But secondly, the state is undertaking a grid study, and the utilities and the transmission owners are informing decision-making on how we can really promote that grid to be able to achieve the build out that we need to reach the 70 by 50. So that's the end of me. We do have like a little bit. Does anybody else have a question as well? I can't really see everybody at the same time. If you unmute yourself and just yell at me, I will hear you. No one? Stunned silence. So we will get, I think, pushed back to the main room in just a minute. But one thing I would just going back to, I think one of the most important things, and so the link here to the tool is up. It is now live as of yesterday, the solar zoning guide. So if you do have an interest in this and it's something that you are working on in your municipality, you know, take a look at that. You do, you know, need to look at it in the context of your existing law, see how it integrates with the model solar law. And Simon, I do hear you that that concept of a model law is very important. It might be something that we look at developing going forward. But at this point, we haven't done it, but we tried to write it in a way that makes sense with the existing NYSERDA things. So we have about 55 seconds left. So we can let it run out here. I keep having these things pop up. So one other thing, yeah,
just to add to that, Audrey, what would be really helpful is, especially to make planning boards and supervisors happy, is if someone was to actually do an inventory of the solar sections of existing zoning and say, hey, these are ones that we like, and these are good clauses to include. Because some of them, I mean, they're all over the place in terms of what's there.
Right, exactly. I think, you know, a couple of years ago, people were creating sort of what I would call a Frankenstein code, right? Like trying to pull them from different places.